Proceedings. We crave your indulgence for a very, very short interregnum. This being Gokhale's birthday, we should like to release a biography of Gopal Krishna Gokhale in English by the late Right Honorable V.S. Srinivasa Shastri. Actually, these are based on extension lectures by V.S. Srinivasa Shastri delivered to the Mysore University about 80 years ago. The book has not been available to the public for some years, and we thought it would be proper to make it available to the public. Hence, we have reprinted it. We request Mr. T.S. Krishnamurthy to kindly release the book. The publication has been sponsored by our long-time supporter and friend Mr. Patti Sridhara, and his wife Ms. Shanta is there. So their charitable trust has sponsored this publication. We thank them for this gesture. We request Mr. Krishnamurthy to kindly release the book. Friends, Gopal Krishna Gokhale was born on 9th May 1866 and died on 19th February 1915. Thus we have met today to celebrate Gokhale's 149th birthday. As our name itself suggests, we belong to the liberal lineage of Mahadev Govind Ranade, Gopal Krishna Gokhale and V.S. Srinivasa Shastri. Srinivasa Shastri, in fact, actively provided guidance in shaping our activities in the early phase. Other personages who evinced consistent interest in our pursuits included Sir M. Vishweshwaraya, Sri C. Rajagopalachari and others. Srimati M.S. Subbulakshmi and Sri T. Sadashivam were our long-time supporters. There is hardly need to explain why our founder Dr. D.V. Gundappa named this institution after Gokhale. Having been inspired by Dadabhai Navroji and others, D.V. Gundappa regarded public work as tapasya, undergirded by conscientious study and objectivity, impartiality, and a constructive approach. These qualities were displayed by Gokhale in an extraordinary measure in his work in various capacities such as Member of Imperial Council, Chairman of Pune Municipality, evidence before various royal commissions, and so on. It is well known that Mahatma Gandhi considered Gokhale as his political guru. The portrait of Gokhale you are seeing before you here was unveiled by Mahatma Gandhi at the condolence meeting organized by D.V. Gundappa and Associates at Bangalore on 8th May 1915, soon after Gokhale's demise. A special significance attaches itself to this evening's program. It was exactly 100 years ago to a day that the seeds for commemorating the liberal legacy of Gokhale were implanted in the mind of D.V. Gundappa. Today also marks the centenary of Mahatma Gandhi's very first visit to Bangalore, which was organized by D.V. Gundappa. That visit of Gandhi is a landmark in the history of Bangalore. We are on the eve of 150th year of the birth of Gokhale, which falls due next year, 2016. Today's celebration may thus be said to mark the launch of the sesquicentennial of the birth of our mentor Gokhale. It is a happy coincidence that Today's Gokhale Day lecture is being delivered by so distinguished a person as Mr. T.S. Krishnamurthy, former Chief Election Commissioner of India, an office to which he brought prestige and dignity. Mr. Krishnamurthy embodies qualities such as integrity and fair-mindedness, which Gokhale championed all his life. It is a happy coincidence that some of his peers, such as Mr. T.N. Sheshan and Mr. N. Gopal Swami, have addressed meetings from the same platform. We are indeed honored to have Mr. T.S. Krishnamurthy in our midst this evening. He would be speaking to us on ethical dilemmas in public life. I request Mr. T.S. Krishnamurthy to kindly deliver his Gokhale Day address.
A very good evening to all of you. My very sincere apologies for the delay. I think although I have studied in Bangalore probably 50 years back, my understanding of Bangalore traffic I think is very poor. And I got stuck in 2 or 3 places. And I cannot give any excuses. I am extremely sorry for the delay that has been caused to all of you. And please pardon me for that. Justice Puttaswamy, Mr. Ramaswamy and Mr. Pati Sridhara, may I say thank you very much for inviting me to this function. We are all delighted to be associated with a great person like great person like Gopalakrishna Gokhale. I believe and selflessly worked for social reforms more than a century ago. Gokhale indeed represented the quintessence of Indian cultural heritage and values. I can also share a little bit of a personal anecdote in the sense while Gopalakrishna Gokhale was born on 9th of May, that is today, I was born on the 19th of May. So I believe at least we are good Taurians, I suppose. Hailing from a very poor family, Gokhale dedicated his life for the cause of India without any expectation or reward. He was a protege of a social reformer, Mahadev Govind Ranade. Mahatma Gandhi himself admitted that Gokhale was his mentor both in the fight for freedom and social reforms. It's perhaps very difficult to find today people like Gokhale in public service. I'm reminded of a quote from Edmund Burke. All persons possessing a position of power ought to be strongly and awfully impressed with an idea that they act in trust and are to account for their conduct in that trust to the one great master, author and founder of society. There cannot be any doubt that Gokhale lived up to this noble ideal even when he was not in power. Although most of us stand for democracy as an ideal and a desirable political system, we realize that we can never make it what it ought to be. Democracy as a concept is no doubt intellectually stimulating and emotionally attractive to everyone. However, as it is practiced today, both in India and elsewhere in Asia and Africa, it would not be proper to state that we have a government by the people in strict terms. This is because of the fact that unlike the direct democracies prevalent in the Greek city-states, we have a representative democracy where voters elect representatives periodically on the basis of their affiliation to political parties, which eventually means that we have a government controlled by a political party with a certain ideology, and such government is very often controlled and directed by a small group or a coterie. As a result, the control the people as citizens are able to exercise over governance is so little that to describe such a system of government as that of the people seems to be indeed a misnomer. Prior to the promulgation of our Constitution in 1950, it would be of interest to note that Dr. Annie Besant had drafted a bill named the Commonwealth of India Bill, which had prescribed qualifications for voting in the various elections and for members of the respective houses, such as central legislature, the state legislature, the district council, the taluk council, and the village council. The bill also provided for maximum decentralization of functions so that the responsibility and accountability to the people on the part of the executive to the grassroots so as to ensure that it does not become a plaything of perverted politicians in a centralized state. Dr. Annie Besant's bill was not taken seriously by the then political leaders. Be that as it may, thanks to the dedicated efforts of eminent framers of our Constitution, we have an unique Constitution, the longest written Constitution in the world, providing for a representative parliamentary democracy with adequate checks and balances between the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, by a beautiful blend of the American and the British political systems. The preamble of our Constitution sums up the political philosophy, highlighting economic equality, social justice, and rule of law. At this stage, it's useful to recall what Dr. Rajendra Prasad, the first President of India, observed at the concluding session of the Constituent Assembly. Whatever the Constitution may or may not provide, the welfare of the country will depend upon the way in which the country is administered. That will depend upon the men who administer it. It's a trite saying that a country can have only the government it deserves. After all, the Constitution, like a machine, is a lifeless thing. It acquires life because of the men who control it and operate it. And India needs today nothing more than a set of honest men who will have the interest of the country before them. We can only hope that this country will throw such men in abundance. Unfortunately, we do not seem to have had such men in abundance in post-independent India. Even after more than 6 decades of independence, our governance cannot be said to be truly democratic. India can boast of having everything: vast human and material resources, a huge market, a reservoir of scientific and technological expertise, abundant entrepreneurial talent, and managerial competence. Yet the country suffers from dangerously demeaning deficiencies in the quality of governance, probably mainly due to historical and attitudinal factors. It is not that India did not have innovative and intellectually competent men and women in the past, but it is the periodical foreign invasions that adversely affected the course of India. To reinforce this view, it would be appropriate to refer to Lord Macaulay's observations in 1835 about Indians at this stage. I have travelled across the length and breadth of India, and I have not seen one person who is a beggar, who is a thief. Such wealth I have seen in the country, such high moral values, people of such caliber, that I do not think we would ever conquer this country unless we break the very backbone of this nation, which is her spiritual and cultural heritage, and therefore I propose that we replace her old and ancient education system, her culture, for if the Indians think that all that is foreign and English is good and greater than their own, they will lose their self-esteem, their native self-culture, and they will become what we want them to be, a truly dominated nation. We and our governance seems to have fallen into Macaulay's trap. While governance means different things to different people and has many dimensions, it can be said without any hesitation that fruits of freedom and development have really not reached all the poorer sections of our society. Development has so far been lopsided, as a result of which socio-economic reforms are tardy and far from satisfactory. Equality before law and equality of status and opportunity cannot be said to have been achieved in full measure. Justice, social, economic, and political, is also yet to be adequately realized. It is therefore imperative that immediate action should be taken up to reform public administration with a clear, coherent, and comprehensive roadmap. The root cause of poor governance in India lies in the poor design of the democratic administration and deficiencies in leadership, in governance. Hence, any attempt to improve the quality of governance calls for a totally new approach to public administration, by which the legal framework is suitably modified to make it unambiguous and people-friendly. The mindset of the administrators and the politicians is changed to make it represent transparent and accountable, and a systematic regulatory mechanism with minimum discretion to officials. This new approach can also be referred by some as new public management. There is indeed an universal impression. Take some water. There is indeed an universal impression that Indian bureaucracy is unhelpful, rigid, unfriendly, rule-bound, and insensitive to the public. Bureaucracy is also blamed because of its rigid adherence to the rules, procedures, and indifferent and arrogant attitude. In my opinion, the wholly negative outlook seems totally unwarranted and is based on certain misconceptions. Firstly, the poor governance is not only because of bureaucratic hurdles, but also due to other political, economic, and social factors, such as political corruption, judicial delays, labor law deficiencies, and in particular, poor enforcement of law and order. This is not to say that bureaucracy is blemishless in its performance. Bureaucrats have definitely to share the blame for not standing up to the evil designs of power-mongering politicians. But to tarnish the entire bureaucracy as a villain in public administration is neither fair nor totally correct. At any point of time, we can always find some bureaucrats helpful, sympathetic, efficient, and fair-minded in spite of many rigidities in the system. But in a country like India, where we have an oversized bureaucracy created to meet the increasing activities of the state, both at the federal and local level, as also other political and social compulsions in recruitment and training, the number of civil servants with a negative attitude is disproportionately high, presumably because of the high discretion given to the politicians and civil servants, fear of audit, vigilance, and ineffective supervision. Bureaucracy is only a good tool in public administration, and its usefulness and effectiveness is dependent upon the system and the environment in which it operates. If the system, namely the rules, regulations, and the laws, is rigid and insensitive, naturally bureaucracy cannot be publicly friendly. Similarly, if the environment is hostile, it cannot be effective. If the political leadership is corrupt and incompetent, the bureaucracy tends to get vitiated in its attitude and performance. What is therefore crucial and critical for good governance in a democratic setup is the quality of bureaucratic and political leadership. Most of the democracies of today have only democracy in form than in substance. This is because the political leaders and other public servants are more interested in providing governance structures without any sensitivity to public interest. After the shackles of colonialism were thrown after the World War, in most of the Asian nations, they were supposed to herald the ascent of democracy. Barring a few countries from Burma and North Korea to Laos, Vietnam, and China, where military rule became very common, other Asian countries held periodical elections only to demonstrate their democratic credentials. Yet, people in many of these countries in Asia and Africa appear to have lost faith in democracy. There are countries like Pakistan, East Timor, Malaysia, Philippines, Bangladesh, and more recently in Nepal. Democracy has been facing fluctuating fortunes, primarily because of lack of proper leadership. The vast spectrum of democracy provides for a large number of ideologically and administratively contradictory political parties, both regional and national, diversity in administration from region to region, and socially different groups, both violent and non-violent, thereby constituting a bewilderingly mosaic of complicated and confusing democratic structure. In such a complicated scenario, our governance has been subject to too many stresses which could not be successfully managed due to the failure of public servants, both political and bureaucratic. The caliber and character of our public servants has had a nosedive since our independence and reached their nadir in mid-70s when we had an aberration in the form of emergency. The political leadership looked for committed judiciary, committed bureaucracy, and so on to such an extent that in the famous Shah Commission report, it was rightly observed that public servants were willing to crawl even when they were required to bend. The relationship between the political masters and the civil servants in rendering public service has very often adversely affected delivery of public services in post-independent India. The focus of government attention shifted from maintenance of law and order to development. The emphasis on development necessitated enormous public expenditure with undefined discretion. The ethical dilemmas of public servants acquired a new scale because of the poor enforcement of rules, laws, and regulations, and increasing opportunities for large-scale corruption at all levels of public service in an environment of abject poverty and widespread illiteracy. The new political order provided extraordinary opportunity for questionable and obnoxious nexus between businessmen, politicians, and bureaucrats, which unleashed many problems affecting the quality of good governance. Conversely, sincere, efficient, and honest public servants faced many hardships in enforcing the various laws which were intended for the benefit of the society. Political interference in day-to-day administration became too common and became too rampant, especially in state governments. Politicians became symbols of abuse of power, although it has to be emphasized that there have been many honorable exceptions. Aurobindo had this apt description of average Indian politician. Quote, "He does not represent the soul of the people or its aspirations. What he does usually represent is all the average pettiness, selfishness, egoism, self-deception that is about him, and these he represents well enough, as well as a great deal of mental incompetence, timidity and pretense. Great issues often come to him for decision, but he does not deal with them greatly. But high words and noble ideas are on his lips, but they become rapidly the claptrap of a party." Broadly, the four areas where the public servants face dilemmas in their jobs are enforcement of law and order, policy formulation in economic administration, including taxation, industrial policy, infrastructure development, etc. C. Execution of development plans, and D. Independent functioning of regulatory authorities. Unfortunately, the political class has been showing extraordinary interest in the day-to-day execution of government policies, whereas their main role ought to have been in the area of sound policy formulation and monitoring the implementation of development plans. In the garb of supervision of plan implementation, the political masters frequently interfere in the day-to-day administration, leaving the civil servants with no freedom in their work. It is not very uncommon to see officers and even officials belonging to clerical class are transferred whenever there is a change of government, more so in the states. Similarly, the posting of police officials who are expected to independently enforce law and order is often interfered with both by the ministers and senior civil servants. To put it in a nutshell, in an all-pervasive atmosphere of corruption, the honest officials are often treated with contempt, suspicion, and hostility, while the dishonest ones get away with political support. In such a state of affairs, the dishonest and inefficient find it easy to survive with political support, while the honest and efficient are sidelined and are subject to unwanted transfers and unwarranted disciplinary proceedings. In this deteriorating state of affairs, the public servants find themselves trapped in the following dilemmas. A. where there is a conflict of interest between political masters and the constitutional provisions, would it be proper to take a stand that unlawful instructions of political masters will not be implemented? When there is a conflict of interest between the government policies and public or national interest, would it be in order to reject the policies in the interest of the public? When there is a blatant misuse of power in the delivery of public services, can the public servant defy and take action against such misuse of power? And when the interest of transparency and accountability, especially in view of the Right to Information Act, the public servant should make a full disclosure of entire information leading to various decisions in the national interest. I have had very many situations where I had to encounter these dilemmas. I have no hesitation in saying that I had refused to carry out orders given by political masters and even senior civil servants if my conscience did not permit, having regard to the laws of the nation and the Constitution. There have been occasions in my public life, particularly in the civil service, where I had to counter ministers and even smaller ministers or ministers of state with whom I had to cross swords. And at one stage, the Prime Minister had asked me, "What is the problem between you and the minister?" I said, "It's a struggle between truth and untruth." And I find that it is very difficult to coexist, but the pity is we have been carrying on with this for about more than 6 months. In fact, even divinity seems to have been providing some kind of a challenge to this kind of a dilemma between the minister and the civil servant. In 1998, when I was supposed to retire, when the age of retirement was 58, I went and told my minister that fortunately I am retiring and you can have an occasion where you can choose a civil servant of your choice. And I am going on a last leave travel concession, and hopefully you will be able to find a more useful and pliable civil servant. In fact, his response was more shocking to me. He said, "If you are nice to us, we will be nice to you." I said, "I don't want to be nice to you because I have no reasons to look for anything from you." And lo and behold, when I came back after my leave travel to Andamans, the age of retirement was increased to 60. So I went back to my minister and told him, "It's a pity that you don't like me, and that unfortunately I am not happy with you either. But destiny demands that we have to work together, and I submit myself to that destiny." It was only after this that I was summoned by the Prime Minister to see that whether anything can be done to repair the damage. I told him that I am willing to move out of this place if the minister is unhappy. Fortunately, the then Prime Minister said, "You will not go, the minister will go," and the minister went. Well, there are situations when you have genuine problems. Some superpower comes and helps you. So it is not that most of the civil servants don't have dilemmas. In fact, there is another incident. The one leftist member, he had requested me not to disclose his name, so I have not disclosed it. I have mentioned about it in my book without quoting his name. He came and met me once. In fact, he called me on the phone and said, "I would like to come and see you." I said, "You are most welcome." But he said, "We don't come and see any civil servant." I said, "It's up to you. If you want to come, you are most welcome. And you can certainly have a cup of coffee with me." He said, "I am coming because I feel that I will get a response from you, and our past experience is such that we will get a response." I said, "You are okay." Then he said, "Please keep my visit confidential. Nobody else should know." I said, "I cannot keep it confidential. All that I can say is I will tell my personal secretary not to talk about it to anybody. Since you are a well-known figure," and he was from West Bengal, "everybody will recognize you, and I cannot give any confidentiality promise." He came, he met, spent some time, talked to me for about 10-15 minutes very interestingly, And then suddenly he said, what's the problem between you and your minister? Because by then it had become flashed in the press and many papers and many magazines. I said, we have no problem, except that he's on a different wavelength. And then he said, can we be of some use in the parliament to support you? I said, no. I know how to tackle my minister. This is one of the things I tell young officers in the government. Do not go to the press. Keep your problem to yourself. And you have to face the challenges with equanimity, with a certain amount of clarity in your mind. And somewhere you will find the light coming in the tunnel. So you don't have to be really seeking and looking for outside support. And it worked, at least in my case. The problem that I had with the minister, as I told you, later on was taken up to the Prime Minister. I also had many occasions where I had to deal with difficult bosses. I remember one day, a boss came and told me, gave me a written paper and said, you have to help this particular case. I said, yes, I will certainly look into it. And when I went through the papers, I felt there was no case for any help. And then the papers had to go through the normal route of decision making. I was expecting a call from him, and then he promptly called me and said, have you had a look at it? Yes, I have. And I told him, it seems very difficult to help this particular case. And then I knew that he was retiring in the next 2 months. I just put it at rest. I did not deal with that. And immediately on his retirement, we passed the orders in accordance with the provisions of law. So there are many such instances in the life of a civil servant. The problems are there even for members of the judiciary, as we have a respected member of the judiciary here. There are many situations where we have found that it's very difficult to meet the interference and the kind of demands made by particularly the political class. So it is not difficult to be an upright person. With all the difficulties and challenges, there are opportunities where you can assert your independence. I always tell my young officers again that in private service, you don't enjoy this kind of an authority and independence that you enjoy in government service. In spite of the fact that there are many, many situations when you have got to deal with difficult issues posed by ministers and even other senior civil servants, we have got a right to be independent. We have a right to be honest, provided you don't take any sides, provided you don't join any cliques. You have to keep a high degree of independence, and nobody can touch a civil servant who is an honest person. There are more challenging situations even after leaving the government service, and I had to function as a constitutional authority. In all these situations, I must say, before that I'll narrate another incident. In one case, a leader of a political party rang me up when we were conducting the elections, saying that there is some complaint in a particular constituency, and the candidate has got a grievance against the election commission. Please listen to him. So that candidate rang me up. They all belong to Bihar. So he rang me up and said, there are a lot of irregularities which have taken place, and then you must cancel this election. I told him how sure you are about the irregularities, because my report from my officers gives me an impression that it has been a reasonably fair election. Although there have been some problems in that area, violence and certain political parties indulging in mudslinging and so on. I said, you wait for 2 days, let the result be announced, and if you have a grievance, you please come to me. Of course, you can file an election petition before the High Court. But if there is any shadow of doubt, I will ensure that justice is done. And you will be surprised, when the result was announced, the complainant politician got elected. So I called him and said, you mentioned about irregularities. You are afraid of losing the election. Why? What is the reason? He seemed to was taking some kind of an advance action, thinking that he might not be elected. So there are many situations, particularly again, in one state, a police officer was addressing the chief minister as daddy in a public meeting. When this was brought to our notice, we were quite shocked. So we said, we will shift him from that place. Fortunately, thanks to the Supreme Court, they had given us the power to shift the officers if they were not in tune with free and fair election. So I told the Chief Secretary, please remove him from that place immediately. He said, I will consult my Chief Minister. I said, if you are going to consult your Chief Minister, please be assured a new Chief Secretary will be posted immediately. You can inform the Chief Minister. I have no objection to that. But you cannot consult him. During the election time, the Election Commission has got an authority to transfer this person. So you don't have to consult him. Thankfully, he immediately complied with the order. Similarly, in Haryana, we had a case where the wife of a DGP was contesting the election. And we requested the Chief Minister to shift this Director General of Police because his house was being used for political purposes. And since he was in charge of law and order, it would not be proper for him to continue as Director General of Police. The Chief Minister attacked me personally. He said, the Chief Election Commissioner has no authority to dictate terms in the matter of administration. And he said he will not transfer the DGP. So the press in Chandigarh, they asked me, what are you going to do? And I said, wait and see. So I called the Chief Secretary and told him, there is a constituency called Batinda. And I told the Chief Secretary, please tell your Chief Minister that if he is not willing to transfer him, I am indefinitely postponing the election in that constituency. And if he wants election to be conducted, because the wife of the DGP was contesting the ruling party's ticket, so if he wants election in that state, in that constituency, he shall jolly well transfer that particular person. Next day he was transferred. So if you are determined to uphold the provisions of constitution and the law, nobody in government servant can stop you. They can transfer you, they can ill-treat you, they may subject you to some unwarranted disciplinary proceedings. These can happen, but one must be prepared. But I can tell you, in the long run, the politicians themselves respect such persons, is what I am saying now. In all these situations, I must say that in fairness, when the political personalities were explained in no uncertain terms that the laws and the rules of the land will not and cannot be ignored, most of these persons fell in line and did not cause any personal harm to me. This is the lesson that the modern public servants should bear in mind while discharging the responsibilities in the interest of the nation. Finally, I thought I should quote two very pertinent quotations which are very important from the point of view of our public life. This is a quotation from Justice V.R. Krishna from his book, Salvaging Democracy, Some Reflections, 1990. We had a great start with adult franchise and equality for sex, creed, and non-discrimination as a rule of law, parliamentary process as an expression of people's power, secular instrumentalities, and institutions of justice and administration. We must take stock now and glance back at these decades through which we marched but did not progress. This is in 1998. Messed up the affairs and corrupted the public life. Of course, we have achieved great things and in some regards astonishing development, which is the envy of other countries. Nevertheless, with all our boasts and all our hopes, our masses are unfree. Our millions of people remain in unspeakable misery. Our public life is corrupt. Our spiritual fiber is falling. Our socialism is specious. And our exploitative order is flourishing. The five-star culture and ill-starred communities are a social contradiction. I am neither a psychic cynic nor a chronic pessimist. I have hopes about our national resurgence. The maladies that afflict us as a nation are many, But true remedy is in recapturing the very values which once illumined our path as we fought the British. Gandhi insisted on, and our national leaders richly possessed, certain remarkable values which are now under eclipse. A resurgence is the desideratum of if our political system locomotion towards our national destination is the progress. This is one point that he mentioned. There is another thing. Oliver Cromwell, I'm sure many of you have read about him. He gave a speech to the Parliament about corrupt politicians. I thought I'll give you a small extract of that speech. He said, "It is high time for me to put an end to your sitting in this place, which you have dishonored by your contempt." This is his address to the parliamentarians in Britain. "It is high time for me to put an end to your sitting in this place, which you have dishonored by your contempt of all virtue and defiled by your practice of every vice. You are a factious crew and enemies to all good government. Is there a single virtue now remaining amongst you? Is there one vice you do not possess? You have no more religion than my horses. Gold is your God. Which of you have not bartered your conscience for bribes? Is there a man amongst you that has the least care for the good of the commonwealth? You are grown intolerably odious to the whole nation. You are deputed here by the people to get grievances redressed, or yourselves become the greatest grievance. I command you, therefore, upon the peril of your lives, to depart immediately out of this place. In the name of God, please go." In the light of experience so far, I'm of the view that we will not reach a situation that was confronted by Oliver Cromwell, but we are steadily proceeding towards that. Unless and until our political system improves, unless and until our political leadership realizes the necessity to uphold the rule of law, we will end up in a situation where people will get such an utter contempt of the politicians and even senior civil servants. The democracy may not survive in this country. So it's time for us to do a deep and serious introspection to ensure that the quality of democracy is improved. There are many solutions, there are many suggestions which have been given. But the most important, in my opinion, is the one relating to the funding of elections. It is the starting point of all political corruption. I have a suggestion, which of course I have given it to the Election Commission, I have given it to the recent workshop of the Law Commission, wherein I have said that in future there should not be any contribution or donation to political parties by individuals or by corporates. The entire donation, if any to be given, should be given to a national election fund. The reason is, if a donation is given to a political party, they also give it not only to the ruling party, they give it to opposition parties to ensure that they are not witch hunted later. And they are looking for rewards from the political parties and political leaders. So if you can snap the nexus between the corporates and the political parties, if you can ban all donations to political parties and divert them to a national election fund, give them 100% tax exemption, and that fund can be used for conducting elections. And the guidelines for this can be on the basis of an all-party conference by which this money is distributed to the various candidates. There are pitfalls in that. I'm not saying that it is absolutely a perfect solution, but it is possible to find solution to see that the election funding is done in such a manner that even a poorest man can contest the election. And if an Indian, particularly the son-in-law of Mr. Murthy, seems to have got elected in UK in the last election, yesterday's election, I see no reason why an ordinary man cannot get elected in India. That is the crux of the problem. If political parties, Justice Venkatacharya has given a recommendation for a separate law on political parties on the basis of our own request to his committee, which looked into the constitution. If we can address ourselves to some of the immediate problems of election, immediate problems of party management, a lot of improvement can take place, and we can certainly have a quality democracy. the civil servants also need to be told in no uncertain terms that they will be protected if they take an honest stand. And I, along with a few bureaucrats, we went to the Supreme Court. We had said that so many recommendations of the committees are available on administrative reforms. They seem to be adorning the dirty almirahs of the Government of India. They need to be looked into, and many important suggestions have been given. For example, the posting of police officers and the senior civil servants should not be left to the whim and fancy of an individual politician. It must be done by a collegium. It can, of course, who will be the members? The Supreme Court has made some suggestions also. In fact, the Supreme Court wanted the Police Commission's report to be implemented without any delay. And you will be surprised, this decision was given quite some time back. And Justice Thomas was requested to consult all the state governments to find out why they are not able to implement the recommendations of the Police Commission's report. In fact, if Police Commission's report can be implemented, most of our law and order problems could have been solved. Unfortunately, all the states are dragging their feet, giving their own reasons. So if the civil servants have to function in a state where there is a costly culture of corruption, it is very difficult for them to act alone. Though there are honorable exceptions who have fought with the politicians and who have survived. But it cannot happen to everyone. There are many people who have suffered also because of the whims and fancies of many of our politicians. The sooner we address to these problems, ethical dilemmas of civil servants will continue. Thank you very much. I won't say yes, I'll give you a reason. Go ahead. Let me answer. The Election Commission is, thanks to the Supreme Court judgment in the Manmohan Singh Gill's case, Supreme Court has said that so long as the Election Commission acts according to the Constitution of India and the Representation of People's Act, and so long as there is a legislative vacuum, when there is no legislative provision to conduct free and fair elections, the Chief Election Commissioner cannot throw his hands in despair and appeal to God. Whatever he says will be the law of the land during that period, so long as he complies with the Constitution and the Representation of People's Act. So it is not that it is totally independent and autonomous. It is independent and autonomous in many respects. There is no doubt about that. And I suppose you are aware from 1991 when Mr. T. N. Seshan took over as the Chief Justice, as the Chief Election Commissioner, he brought it to the notice of the people and the parties that the Election Commission can function independently. Until then, it was considered as part of the Ministry of Law. So there is no doubt that on very many occasions, we have conducted ourselves in a manner, and I think that tradition is being kept up. There have been, for example, there is a constituency called Chabra in Bihar, where Mr. Lalu Prasad Yadav contested the election. And we had a lot of complaints. And when the complaints came to us, we sent 2 special emissaries to that place and to examine whether the complaints were genuine. We found that it was genuine. Then I said, open all the voter ballot papers and find out whether there has been an undue influence. And you will be surprised. The voting was done. The voters gave their name with all political party leaders. The individual voter's name was absent. So we cancelled the election. What they call it is we countermanded the election. And the election was held. It was challenged. We put our order declaring the election process as not in order. The President also called us and asked us, let me have the full facts. So I told him, we have put it in the website. We'll give you a copy of that. And nobody can question the authority of the Election Commission in this matter because we have ample proof that there were a lot of irregularities. So our ultimate weapon, as we call it as Brahmastra, is the countermanding of the elections. But we cannot be doing it in every case. So when you are sure that substantial irregularities are there, this weapon is available. But you cannot say that the Election Commission is totally independent because it has its own limitations in terms of complying with the Constitution, the Representation of People's Act, and the principles of natural justice. For example, there are complaints like, in the midnight I used to get a call. A Muslim lady rang me up and said, I have been harassed. So I had to send our observers, immediately rushed to the spot to find out. And it was substantially true. The policemen misbehaved. They took away all the papers, publicity papers that she had. So we have always displayed our authority. And I can give you any number of instances. One chief minister travelled from Punjab to canvass for elections in Rajasthan. What he did was, he took the helicopter of the state, went up to the border and did some administrative work in the border and crossed over to the Rajasthan by a party car, and started canvassing. We forced the entire expenditure, including the helicopter expenses, to be reimbursed to the government by the party. There are many such instances. Unfortunately, I cannot be narrating many of them. The Election Commission, I'm not saying as a matter of, thinking that we have done excellent work. It has been appreciated by many people. When we conducted the Kashmir elections, we invited the foreign diplomats and the foreign journalists and told them, we will provide you bulletproof cars. Go to any constituency you want to see, and you will find, if there is any irregularity, please bring it to our notice. And the first person who praised our Kashmir elections in 2003 was the American ambassador, who said, I have not seen such a peaceful election in Kashmir. So there are very many instances, but I won't say that we are perfect. We have problems. Particularly in matters of voter registration, we have problems, and we are trying our level best to cure it. But authority is one thing, and authority needs to be exercised at the right time. And it should be exercised in such a manner that the people have faith in the institution. And I can confidently say that at least 90% of the cases, and what is more is every action we have taken has been upheld by the Supreme Court. That is the biggest support we have had.
Friends, we have had a most illuminating presentation by Mr. T.S. Krishnamurthy. He started mentioning the mismatch between the concept and operation of democracy. Our governance leaves much to be desired in spite of physical and intellectual resources. We have a rich spiritual and cultural heritage which needs to be harnessed for governance. Bureaucracy is often blamed for what is a consequence of politics as practiced at present, as he explained. Quality of political leadership has to improve if bureaucracy has to become more efficient. The degeneracy reached a nadir in 1970s, as he said. Subsequently, things have only worsened. Policy formulation and effective implementation have both suffered in recent years. In cases of irrational instructions or policy inadequacies, public servants should have the boldness to exercise judgment. Mr. Krishnamurthy narrated several of his own experiences. If one has integrity and clarity of thought, the situation is not always insurmountable. If an officer maintains independence, he can sail through. No doubt there is some risk, but in the long run, constitutionality prevails. Sir, we are heartened by this message. Some of Mr. Krishnamurthy's suggestions have also been reflected in the recent series of recommendations by the Law Commission to the government. We hope government takes cognizance of the recommendations of the Law Commission. Thank you, sir, for a most illuminating presentation. I request Justice K. Puttaswamy to kindly come on to the stage and honor the speaker.